Ideally, yes, there would be a free, clear pavement in front of the building. But given if you need to place a shelter of some sorts in that area, I believe that you could manage to integrate one without undermining the quality of the appreciation of the heritage building. The pavement there will be 6 metres wide, so that, I believe, gives you good scope to create a design of a shelter that would fit into that space without dominating, without being so large or so visually obtrusive that it would actually undermine appreciation of the heritage building. And that's really what we're trying to achieve with that area and that. That's right. Yeah.
Between 2 and sort of 6 to 10%. Yeah.
They could. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of about Brendan's knowledge on that. Yes, yep. Yes. Yeah, there would be some time, however, you know, where the total numbers of pedestrians, passengers waiting there. Yeah, you know, that's why I'm sort of hesitant about saying that. In traffic terms, yes, we've reduced the pressure on it. And I'll leave it at that.
Just got a couple. We were told right at the beginning it was going to be this big grand boulevard with 4 lanes, and I just can't remember quite exactly the reason why we pulled that out. I know it's due to cost, but I couldn't quite remember how much the cost was to put that big boulevard in. It's either 10 or 100 million, I can't remember, was it?
Right.
That's what initially was proposed.
Yeah, very early on, the Manchester Street proposal was for 4 rows of street trees there. The proposals before council this afternoon, in terms of looking at the cross-section of the corridor there, the problem with the 4 rows of street trees was because of the size of the tree pits that needed to be put in there to accommodate those. Unfortunately, when we got into the detailed design, or CERA staff did, unfortunately, some of the underground utilities there, so that's water supply, sewage, stormwater and so on, sat right underneath where some of those trees would have been. So the modified design is for 3 rows of street trees, still very generous street tree planting, but it actually reduces the cost of underground utility alterations. I don't have an exact cost for that, but our estimate for it was something in the region of $5 to $10 million to achieve the underground utilities changes before we start with the scheme that you're going to see. So our view was that we took council's instructions of last May, that there was $72 million available for this first phase of accessible city programmes, and we were to stick within that budget. And so if we went up with this scheme by $5 to $10 million to achieve those underground utility alterations, we could not have done it within the allocated budget for the scheme. And so they've proceeded on the basis of delivering the streetscape that we envisaged, but necessary modifications to avoid the costs running away with it.
Second question is that you point out one of the negatives of having the bus stop, and the second thing is because you're going to lose 2 existing right-of-ways. Yet you've got, in the proposed one, 2 car parks where an access way is. So if you've got 2 cars parking there, how is someone going to access their property?
The issue really with vehicular access there and a bus stop is more about the vehicles turning in and out between buses, i.e. a big vehicle which obstructs visibility.
This one here, this is on the other side. You had on this one here,
yes,
2 existing vehicle access ways through here.
Right.
And then
sorry, I understand.
one you've got only 1 vehicle access, but you're saying both of them are retained. So if 2 cars are parking, how do they get in?
I understand. The red arrow on option one. The proposed scheme is the existing formed vehicle access that is there now. That's been an at-grade car park, and it was pre-earthquake. In fact, if you look on Google Street View, it was there in 2008. We understand that the developers there may be proposing a second vehicular access. We do not know that for sure, but we understand there may be a second one there, and it may be in that location. Were that to be the case, then in concert with them, there may need to be a modification to the arrangement of the on-street
So we're
parking.
actually making judgments on something that someone may do for this other part. So if we, for example, say decided that we might remove the airport bus, which is going to be going to number one, over to the other side, so you actually have less buses on the south of this part here. So we, instead of having two car parks there, we actually have a bus stop there. You're saying we couldn't put it there because they may actually have an access way there, so I'm sort of a bit confused there, to be honest.
So we understand that their proposals includes off-street parking. That's a different situation to the properties south of Worcester, where there is an access way there, but it is at the very southern end.
Southern end, but we could say, look, for example, say we could put the number one bus stop, which is at the front here, over to this side, and put two car parks here.
Okay, so this is splitting the stops.
Yep.
Yes. Or perhaps if that's the question, could we split the stops? We believe not, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The proposal for these two super stops is great legibility for passengers. You know, you get on and off a bus at a location, and people know where they're going to catch the bus and then join a bus.
But this is going to be a whole new stop, so that argument is probably not actually that valid, because it's a whole retraining exercise of where people to go anyway.
Our problem here is that and this is really quite a firm issue with ECAN, and that is clustering and legibility of the stops. Our problem with splitting the stops is that we couldn't do it cleanly across Worcester Boulevard. There's been quite a bit of discussion, I think, about the airport bus. In some respects, that would be the easier one to split out, but actually it doesn't just serve the airport. The airport bus services other destinations of normal metro customers, and it just happens to have a degree of its patronage to and from the airport. So there is actually no easy service that we can actually say to passengers, you go for your bus north of Worcester Boulevard, others go for a south. If we're getting more people using buses, which is what we hope for, what we're worried about is passengers going to the wrong set of stops, and that actually they go to a stop south of Worcester Boulevard, realise actually that the bus they really wanted to be on is leaving north of Worcester Boulevard, and then they leg it to get to the bus because the thing's pulling in. And so we're worried about a road safety problem of people running about not. And so that's the idea of actually having nice, clean, legible stops in a cluster both sides of the corridor.
The last thing I want to ask you for a comment on is the future of public transport, and how's that going to look in even 3 years' time? Are we spending a lot of money on hard infrastructure that could become quite irrelevant in 3 years' time with the driverless cars, Uber, and all these other things that are coming on play?
I think what we now have, I use the bus every day myself, I think what we now have is a quality of interchange here in this city which we can be proud of, is finally the type of airport concourse style facility that we've promised people and is actually there now. We want to replicate that on street, and as I think we've said to Council previously, achieving a threefold increase in public transport patronage and cycling in the central city is not an optional, it's not a icing on the cake, it's absolutely critical to achieving congestion management in the central city. This central city is attracting a lot of new business, housing, activities and so on. They are going to generate if we don't get more people on buses and bikes, something like an extra 70,000 vehicles a day on central city streets. So we're seeking to accommodate the increased activity by improving choice and giving people the choice of being able to use buses, bikes and walking, so that we can actually manage.
Could argue
traffic
that it's only
levels and
5 minutes
congestion.
walk from the actual interchange itself.
Okay,
So if we're
Paul, there's
promoting
a
walking,
heap
they
of
could walk a little
questions.
bit further.
So here's what I've got. I've got Raph, Pauline, Jamie, Tim. You're out. that was a really short tolerance zone. Pauline.
Yeah, I'm just going back to the technology that you guys have latched onto that's being operated in the bus interchange. So why can we not use that to make sure that there's never 3 buses there?
Well,
Could that be possible?
to a degree, it almost does.
Right.
Because the way the interchange works is there shouldn't be
Yes, so you could
clusters
just
of
release
buses
them.
coming out. They should be being released. All we've tried to do is to say, look at the worst case scenario. That the worst case scenario is you get a cluster of 2 buses coming out.
Right, okay.
being
Well, I think
released
that
from the
makes quite a big
interchange
difference then, that there's a very small likelihood that there will be 3 buses there at any one time. Thank you.
Okay, you right, Pauline? Cool. Jamie.
Why, given that it's too hard for people, if we had one of the stops further north and people would get too confused with all that and couldn't work it out, given that the Crown owns the eastern side of Manchester Street, as it's in that east frame there, why couldn't we just locate both of the super stops in that block?
On the same, so you have to cross the road to catch the bus.
No, so you've got the north and south.
So sorry, Jamie, how does it work?
We've got, instead of having the southbound one block over and the northbound one block down, you just have them in a more appropriate block. So there's super stops, one south, one north on either side of the road, depending on which direction you're going, as in the northern block.
So where's the northern one located?
Well, literally the other half of this super stop is one block above, one block
So
north.
you're doing the switch.
No, I'm not switching anything. I'm saying just put them both. No.
Okay, sorry,
No,
Jamie,
stop.
just be really
Same.
explicit.
Same. Instead of having northbound on one side and southbound on the other, why not just have them both on
Yes.
opposing sides of the road?
I understand that. That was looked at very
Yes.
early on, and in fact that was the original proposal. And the idea was maybe to have some form of central platform within the corridor. The problems with that were, and we probably should have realised it earlier, but one of the problems with that is that we were then expecting pedestrians to cross from the footpaths on both sides of the street to get to a central platform to get to the buses. And so our worry with that was pedestrian safety, getting to those central islands. We need to really manage the speeds and flows down there. But the real problem with that sort of idea is visually impaired pedestrians, because they rely on the buses, and so their call all along is get straight on a bus from a footpath, not have to cross traffic to get to it. Is that answer the
Well, if you were heading north, wouldn't you be on the northbound side? And if you're heading south, you'd just be on the southbound side?
Yeah, but that was the idea, was to use the widened carriageway of 29 metres to actually put the thing in the middle of the corridor. And for a number of reasons which are outlined in attachment 10, unfortunately we came down against that. We thought it was a great idea, otherwise we wouldn't have proposed it.
Yes.
But actually, as we started to work through the detail of it, we started to undertake safety audits of it. We just thought, no, this is a non-starter. We just cannot do this.
Can I ask a second one there, Madam Chair?
Yeah.
So with this revisit and the, I guess, take 2 on how this is going to look, you've engaged with the business community that had some opposition around this. Have you got them on board with this?
We believe this proposal would enable the findings of the hearings panel to actually take effect, and that is whatever form of shelter goes in here, now that we've put forward a traffic proposal to remanage the stop would then enable those discussions to take place in a positive framework around that, where we've reduced the pressure in front of the heritage buildings, and we still believe that there is a great design solution out there that can be achieved in concert with those submitters.
So you think this proposal, 207, 213, Shands Emporium, Trinity Church, they'll be really happy with this?
We hope so.
Okay.
Thank you. Just, I guess, in part following from what Paul has suggested and also what Vicky just suggested, if we look at the page 125 of the separately circulated attachment, that's the original picture that went to the hearings panel with regards to the shelter full stop. I believe that's correct, isn't it? So there's no picture of Trinity Church or anything in that original picture, so that was quite a surprise, I guess. And it's not surprising that the shelter, once you take into account the Trinity Church, etc., with the original shelter was thrown out. We have a stop north of Worcester Street now, on the same side as the northern bound so there's an existing stop there. So if we could bring up the picture which has 1, 2 and 3 on it, if that's possible. So thank you, great.
Okay.
So with regards to 3, then the blue bus, Shands Emporium is right behind that. So we are talking about taking out the shelter from the left-hand side of Shands. So Shands has no shelter whatsoever in front of it. So if that number 3, the blue bus, which is the airport bus, which only arrives twice an hour, was to use the existing stop, therefore no consultation, I believe, would be needed, and maybe Brent can clarify that, then that would clear this site up and for the vision to the public of these 2 historic buildings. You mentioned before, with regards to a loading zone to be used or could be used by Trinity Church, etc., which would be available from 7 p.m, between 7 p.m. and 7:30 a.m. If Trinity Church were used as it had been prior to the earthquake, and you are running an event there, say at 7:30 at night, if you've got access to load in from 7 p.m, I'd say your chances of actually running your successful event starting at 7:30 would be 0. So therefore, I think we've got to talk with the Trinity Church with regards to that, to look at the viability of the operation of that and what it's going to be proposed for. But I'm certainly in favour of moving that number 3 to the other side. So.
But in part of that, don't you then remove about 9 trees? Because you haven't got a bus stop in this current plan.
Yeah. So
That's the downside.
there's an existing bus stop there, but there's no shelter, and
no shelter,
we've previously discussed the airport bus, and we've used this generic term airport bus. It's not just used by airport passengers, it's used by other metro customers.
But we're only going 100 metres or 80 metres up the road. So to have your commuters getting off 80 metres up the road, if people have booked their tickets right round the world and they've got here and they...
Just a point of order, I think this was answered through Paul Lonsdale's question though, wasn't it?
It's all right, we'll come to it. I mean, clearly there are a couple of issues associated with it. One, there is no existing bus stop in the redesigned. There is now, but there is no in the redesign. And you actually take out the whole boulevard concept for that chunk in order to put one bus in there.
But one thing is there's already an existing bus stop on Manchester Street.
Yes.
North of Worcester.
Yes.
So one thing that would have to happen would be another Section 339 process around the shelter for that stop.
But there's no shelter proposed for the number 3 as it is now that we're discussing. So why would we put a shelter up the block?
Because these guys can
Because-
stand in the
because-
shelter right next door.
Yeah, because the people that will be using stop number 3 actually
But the
stand
next-
on the shelter by stop number 1. Because it's such low frequency,
But they
they're
can't
gonna
in the
walk
next
short
block.
distance.
The 3 bays are effectively using a shortened shelter more efficiently.
Okay, I haven't got any more question, people. Oh, yes, I have, Yanni. All right, Dave. And Phil.
So when you look at the traffic plan, and you know we're in a dynamic environment with the blueprint, and we now know that, like for example, the south frame is no longer the cycling and pedestrian frame that it was supposed to be. And I got you, and thank you for providing the kind of traffic, the overall within the 4 Avs. But when you look at that plan, you see quite clearly a few fundamental flaws in the design, which is places like Gloucester Street actually are not the most sensible route for buses to be going on, and Armour Street are, because Gloucester Street gets cut off at Colombo Street, whereas Armour goes straight through. So I'm just kind of really want to understand whether we've just done a whole big planning exercise on a document that was created nearly 2.5 years ago that doesn't reflect the modern reality of what's happening in the central city, which is, you know, we've got a lot of office development happening on the west of the square, around Durham Terrace, where people will be working. We've got very little residential on the eastern frame at the moment, and more fine-grained hospitality happening along Manchester Street, which would kind of signal to me that that's not the priority for a bus passenger stop. So, at the moment. So I really want to understand, how you've got to this idea that you have to have the super stop here, given that the blueprint has changed, and, you know, whether you've considered how future changes to the transport network are future-proof through what you're proposing.
Most of the key traffic changes were signalled through an accessible city, and they were extensively consulted over at the time. Some of the local issues here around, say for instance, switching Gloucester to Armour Street here is you have the Margaret Mahy family playground that's going to be going in immediately north of Armour Street. That wouldn't be a great street to make it as a key traffic street. So the focus has generally been on Hereford and Gloucester streets for those east-west distributors, but with the main east-west distributor streets further to the south at St Asaph and Durham streets, which we were discussing earlier. Almost from the outset, Manchester Street has been seen to be the key north-south bus street in the central city, and there's a very good reason for that, because right back at the time of Share an Idea, one of the main pieces of feedback we had on public transport in the central city was that people disliked the level of bus traffic and activity coming through Colombo Street in the very heart of the retail precinct. And so the objective all along was to try and lift the buses out of the very central core of the city. That's given us the advantage of putting cycle routes in there and slowing it down there. So we believe that the Manchester Street proposals actually do lock in a substantial level of public transport and infrastructure investment on this corridor, which is good news for development off this corridor, both sides of it. Commercial and mixed-use development on the west side, and primarily residential development through the east frame on the eastern side. All of those proposals assume this is going to happen, and therefore we believe this provides certainty.
Okay,
So basically, we can't change the transport plan. We can't change the bus routes. But say one of the ideas that we've had is we want free public transport in the central city, and some of us want it for the entire city. Would that change where you'd put the super stops? If people didn't have to worry within the 4 Avs, where they actually got on the bus, they could take it to go anywhere within the 4 Avs.
I don't think it changes as a basic principle, that what we're trying to do is to achieve broadly a 5-minute walk time to most of the key bus stops in the central city. There are 2 main super stops supporting the interchange. That's the hospital and here. The hospital gives access to Metro Sports and all of the increased activity we're expecting around that health precinct there. This gives great access, as we've explained in the report, to the northern part of the core, that large residential development in the eastern frame there, the performing arts precinct, the new library and so on. If this wasn't here, anywhere on Manchester Street, if basically you couldn't pick up a bus on Manchester Street, your next stop is Kilmore. So, you know, it's a big walk between the interchange and Kilmore Street.
Okay.
So it's a balance.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I've got Dave and then Ellie, and then I'm going to suggest a 5-minute coffee, because it feels like 5-minute coffee. There is tea and coffee out there, but you're not allowed to leave until you finish questions. And then we'll come back and debate it. Yep, you're allowed a question too, Phil. Yep. But I've got Dave next, then Ellie. Oh, no. It's a question, Dave. Okay, Ellie, you have yours while Dave's doing distributing.
Yep. Do you want me to ask now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
We'll come back to yours, Dave.
There's been mention of 2% buses or 2% for that third stop. My understanding is at the hearing that the figure that was floated there in peak hour was 38 buses.
No, I think the numbers we've got. Yeah, if you could. Thank you.
Sorry, just to clarify the numbers on the buses. So we've, since the IT committee met, gone back and looked at the bus timetables to understand the likelihood of that third bay being used. And a couple of models, there's no succinct way of looking at it, but basically if you were to observe a bus moving up Manchester Street, we think that given the current timetable and assuming a random arrival or a random platoon of buses, 1 in 50 of those times, 2%, you'll see 3 buses in a movement. But of course buses dwell at bus stops, they have to unload passengers and reload people, and we think that actually the dwell time of those 3 bus stops, the amount of time that third bus stop will actually have a bus waiting, will be about 10% of the peak hour, so about 6 minutes. Subject to depending on how many people are getting on, but we've gone down to a bit of detail and assumed how many people get on with Metro cards versus pay-in and things like that. So about 10% of the peak hour will be that third bus stop will have a bus in it.
Number of buses?
I think the current timetable is about 27 northbound in the peak hour.
So 27 in that third bus stop?
So 27 buses moving northbound on Manchester Street in the peak hour in total. So that's total over the hour. The number of buses that will stop, well, it depends on the allocation. So of course, if I'm the third bus arriving at that northbound bus stop and there's 2 buses already parked there, I'm going to pull into that third bus stop. Now, what I'm saying through our modelling is that will occur, there'll be a bus pulls into that third bus stop about 10%, about 6 minutes in the peak hour.
So give me a number, sorry.
Sorry, what's the question?
Third bus stop,
Yep.
in peak hour.
6 minutes.
Yeah, how many, my maths isn't great, 51 school cert maths.
Yep.
How many buses
Will pull in there?
peak hour will be pulling into that third bus stop?
Just
roughly.
I would say about 5 buses.
That's great, thank you. And I just wanted to ask, is it usual in a situation like this not to have had a level of consultation with those who are directly affected, i.e. the Trinity Church with the events and so forth, Shan's with the access to their building? Is it usual not to have had a degree of consultation? I've heard you say, I hope so, when asked, are the businesses happy? So that's my question, is this usual?
We listened very carefully to the submissions that were made at the hearings panel on August the 11th and further submissions from the submitters last Thursday at ITE committee. At that committee, the proposal that we have before council this afternoon, we hadn't thought of. You know, that they expressed their concerns about the access in front of the buildings, and so we've been working hard in the meantime since ITE committee last week and council today to assure ourselves before we propose this to councillors this afternoon as a possible resolution to this issue that we've needed to investigate with third-party traffic engineers we've had looking at this week. Is this actually a workable solution? And we believe, as of some work that was concluded yesterday afternoon on this, that this is now a viable solution for us to propose.
Can I just confirm,
Yep.
we were absolutely in discussions with the Trinity Church and the Heritage Trust through the consultation, through the preparation of the material for the whole consultation process. And so we were talking to them about locations of bus stops and locations of shelters. Once the hearing process started, so the consultation material went out for the hearing about the location of the shelter, we actually withdrew them from consulting with them. We let that process take over. But we've absolutely had dialogue with them over the past 6 months about the fact that a bus stop was proposed to go in this location and how they wanted that amended or redesigned. And we did actually pull back from a bus stop and a shelter in front of the Shands building. However, we were taken a wee bit by surprise when, in front of the Trinity building, we were taken a wee bit by surprise when Shands relocated, because that happened very, very quick.
Right, okay, I've got Dave and then Phil.